Welcome to the Deep Light podcast from Park City's Presbyterian Church. This is a space for community, healing, hope, and education around topics of rescue and growth. Our prayer for this series is that it illuminates a deeper understanding of struggles within and around us, as well as God's profound love and redemptive light in Jesus Christ.
Hi, I'd like to welcome everyone to another episode of Deep Light. My name is Mark Davis. I serve at Park City's Presbyterian Church as one of the pastors. And we're just grateful that you're taking time to listen or to watch this podcast. It's the summer of, it's June 2022. We're talking about rhythms of rest and what does that look like in our life together. And we know how challenging that can be because of how busy our world is. But hopefully today, you will find encouragement from our time together. Today, we have the Huffines with us, and I'm grateful to spend time with Sam and Lauren today. They're new parents, or they have a parent of a, how old?
14-month-old.
14-month-old little girl, and you told me she just now has learned to?
Walk.
And she is a brand new walker.
She's getting good.
She's getting good. Describe for everyone what you shared with me a little bit ago about the purse and the...
Yeah, it's weird at this stage because they don't look like they should be able to walk.
Yeah.
And proportionality is just, it's defying physics, but she still finds a way to waddle her way. And so she has this like little, it's like a small purse, and she has a little rattle that's shaped like a phone.
Yeah.
And watching Lauren leave the room and Eloise realize that it's her time to leave too and grab her purse and phone on the way out, it was just panic inducing. It was like, there's two of them now. I thought I had more time, you know, like.
I like that. It's panic inducing. Maybe we'll come back to that theme in a little bit. Well, I really am grateful that you guys would spend some time with us today. Being very young parents. I remember having a conversation with you either right after she was born or right before. I don't know if y'all remember this, but we were in the belly of the church. And you were talking about how do we get training? How do we become equipped to do this? And hopefully there'll be a lot of things we do in the future. But one aspect of it is learning how does your life change when you have a child? What rhythms change? Which rhythms become new and necessary and beautiful, but maybe also challenging, particularly when you're used to doing things a certain way. And when we were thinking about this series on rest and rhythms, we thought it would be great to have a young couple in who have a little child or children who could kind of talk about how does that look like for you? What are the challenges that you face? What are the answers to those challenges? And maybe we'll have some, maybe we won't, but I think it'd be a really fun conversation. So let's start with, how did you guys meet? Tell me a little bit about your story, because I don't really know that story.
Yeah, so I had taken a job in Houston right after I graduated and was there for a couple years.
Where'd you go to school?
Texas A&M.
Okay. I always want to give people a chance to respond to that.
Listen to the listeners whoop right now.
Right. I hear it. I can hear it.
But yeah, so went to Houston for a little bit, worked there for a few years, and had a chance to come home and back to Dallas, and really kind of was starting kind of fresh on establishing myself in a new city, and I didn't have a community quite established. You know, I had some connections from A&M that had come here, but just kind of was getting set up and spent a year just establishing kind of myself in Dallas and what that would be like. And through that, joined some kind of social activities I have a lot of cousins that are here.
All over Dallas.
I outsourced social activity to them in a lot of ways. And through that, our families knew each other. And so I kind of had gotten introduced to Lauren through just some social stuff through my cousins. And it was kind of, I like to say, on radar at first sight, maybe.
That's funny.
Just, you meet her and you think, wouldn't mind getting to know her better. And I think it was mutual. I don't know.
Yes, it was.
Good. I'm glad you said that. If not, it could have took it another turn.
And so we just kind of really slowly started just trying to get to know each other better. And through that, I found that this is a real sweet girl with a real sweet heart. And it just blossomed into marriage and happily ever after.
So how long have y'all been married now?
3 years?
3.5 years.
3.5 years.
3.5 years. Do you remember your first date or first dates?
Yes. It took us a while before we could actually go on a date.
Okay, what
Had
was
to keep rescheduling, you know?
3 months of like back and forth. But we went to the Frida Kahlo exhibit at the DMA as our first date.
It was
Okay.
after church on a Sunday. We walked through the museum, and then we realized at the end of the walk that there was the real line for the real exhibit. And everything that we had
like a
seen so far.
two-hour
And it was like a
line.
2 hour line, and we were like, so let's go get brunch. And
That's really funny.
it turned into a great, I don't know if we saw some of her art, but I don't know if we saw the exhibit, but we had a great time together, and it was fun. It was kind of cool early on when you make that connection, just looking at somebody else and you can tell they're thinking the same thing you're thinking.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't want to stand this line, but I know we came here for this.
That's really funny.
Yeah, it was a memorable date.
So how long did y'all date before you got married?
So we started going on dates in, was it March of 2017.
Okay.
And then we got married in January of 2019.
Okay. So a couple years.
Yeah, a couple years.
So basically in a 5-year period, 2 years dating, then 3 years of marriage, you guys have had pretty significant changes in terms of what life was like individually. You're single, then you get married, now you have a little girl. So let's talk about what were you like, just personality-wise? How was your life organized around the way you thought about your relationship with the Lord, rhythms of your life, daily, weekly, monthly, et cetera? What was that like? And then how did that change after you got married, if at all?
For me, it was very personal. I honestly wasn't very good about going to church, but I felt like in my own way, then this is how I felt, that I was close with the Lord because I spent a lot of time in the Word and I hung out with friends one-on-one and had those conversations. But it honestly wasn't until I met Sam that he introduced me to PCPC and we started coming here weekly, and I became a part of this community spiritually, everything changed for me as soon as we started dating.
I love that. What about for you, Sam?
Like I was saying, I was new to the city, and I always had this okay, I got to hit the ground running. I got to build a community. I got to get plugged in. I think I probably did that a little bit, maybe too aggressively. I don't know. So I had looked back at my schedule at one point when I first moved to Dallas, and it was like, okay, Monday morning Pegasus with Blake. Yeah. Tuesday morning guys Bible study. Yeah. I'm trying to remember what Wednesday and Thursday was, but then I was leading a high school guys Bible study too at the time, and so it was I think it was 4 out of the 7 days a week I was up here at PCPC
doing something,
church. And it was a bit too much, I guess, but I didn't have anything else really going on, and it was really a great way to just meet as many people as possible and really feel like I was part of the community quickly. Yeah. And so my schedule was hectic, but I do think a lot of it turned into me finding too much of my identity in the fact that I was patting myself on the back saying people know me here and I just got here, or whatever. And adjusting my pace of life around having Lauren and, it was really helpful to kind of hey, this is a really neat perspective of somebody that's wrapped up their entire identity about being at the church and in the church and everything, and someone that's kind of new to the idea of we could go to church every week, and just meeting in the middle there and finding a good pace, I think was actually healthy for me too.
So when you were thinking about getting connected and you were kind of creating your strategy, for lack of a better word, whether you knew it was a strategy or not, how, if at all, soon did you realize maybe this is too much, maybe I'm doing too much, or was there even an awareness of that at all, or is it just this is what I do, this is what you do, here I go?
There's times I was falling asleep at my desk at work. I think that maybe that's one of those times when you're I might be doing too much. But I don't know. It's kind of gradually, I finished the cohort with Pegasus, and we rolled out of the table I was at the Tuesday morning Bible study was this all the young single guys, we'll just throw you this table in the back. Y'all are all, table together or whatever. And then, stages of life started changing for those guys too. So they were getting married, having kids or whatever. And it was just kind of it was just a natural kind of time to kind of step away from that for a little bit. And so things just kind of fell off and my high schoolers graduated,
So things just naturally began to slow down.
Yeah, it slowed down as I was looking for maybe a better rhythm of my own. Things just kind of fell off. So I think it was more of just the not replacing something with something as soon as I rolled out of it, if that makes sense.
So how would you guys describe the rhythm of the culture we live in? What are some adjectives you would use to say for most people, could be including the three of us, this is what the rhythm of our life feels like? What are words you'd use to associate with that?
It's almost like you make time for rest when you can't keep up your pace anymore. You hit a wall and then you rest because you crashed. Yeah. Is what I would think of it.
Yeah. Lauren, how about you?
I mean, everything is so constant right now. We're always being bombarded with something. So I think it's almost impossible in our culture to find rest because you have your phone with you all the time. It's always binging, even in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Sure. It's very distracted culture.
Yeah. So you talked about the image of crashing, like we're moving so fast to a point where eventually we just can't handle anymore. We have a crash, whether that's physically, you're sleeping at the desk, mentally, emotionally, relationally, spiritually, whatever it might be. I think it's a good description. Why? Because of input overload. I mean, it really is every endeavor we're engaging in, every organization we're part of, it's just a constant onslaught. Yesterday, my wife, we're recording this on June 17th, my wife sent my assistant the school calendar for next year, which is going to start in August, right? And all the back, I just wrote back, boo. That's B-O-O-O-O-O-O. It's just like, I don't even want to think about that right now. School just got out 2 weeks ago, but that's the reality. And that's going to start with the church stuff that's coming too. Probably we've already sent stuff out. So that rhythm of finding rest that's healthy, even biblical, is really hard because the culture we live in doesn't say this is what matters. And so the crash is a reality so often for so many of us. Y'all agree?
I mean, just like last night, we were sitting in bed and we wanted to watch some TV, and then we both checked our phones. We're like, oh, we didn't respond to this email. Oh, we didn't book our flights for this. And then end up spending our time that we could have used actually resting like we wanted to.
Just unwinding even, you know, I mean, and then it basically, yeah, it resulted in a crash because by the time we both finished what we were trying to knock out, it was like, you just go to bed? Yes, go to bed, you know.
Well, don't feel bad. The very same thing happened to us last night. We got in bed, and occasionally we'll watch a TV show. Thursday's my day off, so it's kind of the night that we're, I've had a pretty relaxed day usually, and then we sit down. But I noticed my wife had her laptop, right there in the bed. I was like, I don't know what that means, and so she got in bed, and I said, are we going to watch TV, or are you going to do something on your laptop? I just got to check a few things. And that was the answer. It's like, okay, those few things. And I wasn't upset, but it's just like, it's going to go. So I just grabbed my iPad.
Sure.
An hour later, the TV, I think, might have even been on, but we're not engaging that, nor are we engaging one another.
Sure.
And it's not hurtful. It could be, but it's not. It's not offensive. It's just reality. And then at some point, one of us probably just turned the lights off and we went to bed. That's pretty normal, and I think that's kind of the world we live in, just because it's this and the iPads, the laptops, the noise is all there. Some of it's required for life, for work, et cetera, but some of it's probably not. It's probably self-induced problem that we've just gotten in the habit of. It's just a habit. It's just, this is the air we breathe, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So you guys got married. How did marriage change in a good way, but also challenge, and maybe not a good way, the rhythms that you had individually and then what it looked like together?
You want to go first on that?
Well, so he's very extroverted and I'm very introverted. So it was kind of nerve-wracking for me about how is he going to fit his extroverted life with my introverted life, which is very self-centered for me to have thought. But I think we did a very good job of bringing it together.
Yeah, I think so. I think Lauren recharges from not necessarily having to be alone, but not having to be at a function of some kind. And so just like a quiet dinner with like another couple doesn't drain Lauren, I don't think. And
that breathes life into you. Something like that gives you,
and so I think that was kind of something we discovered. It was like, okay, I can still be with people, and as my old roommates used to say, like, drain the life out of them to recharge myself, or whatever. But like, I can still get to do that.
I was scared he wasn't going to have fun with me because he was living in a house with 4 other boys.
Your son-in-law being one of them.
Just all this social,
all the time,
fun all the time. I was like, he's going to be so bored with me.
Oh, he needed you.
I just want to stay at home.
It was almost like you didn't realize you were running on a treadmill until you get off, and it's just all of a sudden like it's not the pace of life that I would have stumbled into without Lauren, and it's just like a much better pace of life. So I think, and the same thing kind of with like a lot of phases of life that change. We don't realize that, you think about a further down the road phase or whatever, and you kind of try to fit it into what you're doing right now, and it doesn't map in your mind. But then when you wind up there, you're like, oh, this is good. Like, it's good to be here.
You couldn't have imagined it because you just didn't know.
Right.
It's like when you have a child, there's a new level of love that comes over you. You've heard about perhaps, but you really can't know until you see your child. It's like, okay, this is totally different than anything I've known before. Yeah, that's good. Well, I love the way you described him. When I took the Myers-Briggs test, this is 1991. We got married in 91. I didn't score one introverted point. So they gave the score back. And the truth is, I'm not really that extroverted, but I was answering it the way I thought you were supposed to answer it. If I'm a youth pastor, I've got to be extroverted. And I definitely know how to be in front of a crowd, but I don't get my energy from crowds. Certainly not now. But my wife, it was more like you, Lauren. She scored not all introverted points, but mostly that. And she would get her energy from being by herself, with me, or with a small group, not by the crowds that we were constantly around. And we had kids from our youth ministry in our house, all the time. So there were no boundaries. We had literally no boundaries until we had children. And when we had children, our first child, Kara, which you guys know Kara, it was pretty easy still. But then when we had a second child, Madeline came along, we call her Maddie, all of a sudden we began to look at my life and my boundaries, which were way out of control. Nothing had really changed for me in terms of my schedule and the way I saw life. Meanwhile, my wife is drowning, trying to care for these two little ones while I'm doing all sorts of things that are life-giving, fun, energetic. And we really were in a pretty tough place in terms of what was life going to look like. And we needed desperately for wise people to speak truth into reordering our life. I really needed it more than Christina did, but we knew it was going to have to be something that the two of us came together on. So now you have a little girl, 14 months old, just learning to walk, becoming really good at it. What has happened in the last, 14 months or so to the rhythms of your life? How have they changed? Have they been challenged? And as you think about, this is a longer question, but as you think about into the future, what do you imagine being challenges you face as young parents?
So we actually kind of talked about this recently, and I think we kind of went at it from different perspectives. I think having a child slowed us down in a forceful way. There is not a way to have dinner plans every single night of the week when you have a newborn.
But we tried.
But we did try. I mean, like you said, sometimes your pace has to be forcefully removed from you. But just the realities of a little child and their needs and your role in their life forces you to make that shift. And like the other thing I was talking about, it's not a phase of life that you think about going into and being like, I'm gonna love that. But then when you get there, it was like, oh, this is good. Like, just when was the last time we spent a week straight of just having a meal together, just the two of us at home? Because that had not happened, I think, in our marriage, like, at all.
There's COVID.
There was COVID, but even then we were scheduling like FaceTime dinners with friends. I mean, that's how, like, I don't know, just social. I don't know. We had set ourselves up as.
Yeah. So all of a sudden, having this little girl begins to give opportunity that didn't exist before, maybe born out of necessity, but then sometimes also just out of, this is what we have energy for, or time for right now, and this is good. So as you guys think about moving forward, what are things that you really hope to establish as good rhythms for your life together as a family?
Yeah, going.
You can go.
I think we've fallen into all the rhythms we've had, and so maybe it would be fun to plan one. But one of the ones that we kind of have noticed is that we don't really try to have anything scheduled on Sunday, and using that as a time to just kind of have it be there, to just take it easy, not be rushing off to something, not even having ourselves be open to things, and just knowing that that'll be kind of like whatever we decide as a family we're going to do for this time. If it's a quiet dinner with friends, or if it's just us, or if we just kind of relax, having that. And it wasn't something we planned. It's just something kind of like organically we found and we've enjoyed. And just being cognizant of that is that this is kind of a sweet time that we've fallen into here. Like everything else is that before we head into another busy week or whatever, that we found organic restfulness. What about you?
I'm always thinking about more things I can schedule with Eloise so that I can in turn have some rest myself.
Yeah. Things
honestly.
like what?
Well, I'm getting excited because she's going to start a Mother's Day Out program in September. And then, I have friends that sign their kids up for everything, for music class. And it's one of those things where, like, I want her to be able to rest too. I don't want to overschedule her, but it would be nice for me to have some time for just me also. Yeah,
and that's not selfish. I think sometimes people can feel like, oh, that's selfish because I want time for me. I think that's in some ways part of the problem is that those extremes exist. First of all, we live in a culture where you and your daughter could be busy if you sign her up for everything. And I love what you said. I want her to have time for rest too. I have not had a mom say that to me in a long time in terms of perspective about their child. I think that's really, really important because, being a youth pastor for so long, a pastor now, having my own kids, I see the need that they have for rest. And there's so little because there's so much activity offered, almost all of it's good things, but those good things, too many of them then rob you from the great. And one of them is that we get out of bounds with the opportunity for rest with them. And each child's different. Some kids need more activity, some kids need less activity. That can actually change over time. But I love, Lauren, the way you said that. I want her to have rest as well. So how do you imagine, and maybe you do this already in a particular way, but if not, how do you imagine trying to make those decisions? Like how do you guys anticipate? I know she's only 14 months old, but how do you anticipate thinking about, we'll say yes to this, no to this, yes to this, no to this. Have y'all thought about that?
I think it's going to be hard. I feel like we're kind of a yes family.
Yeah, as it described. Yeah, we don't usually. We're more limited by like exhaustion than we are by our like careful planning of anything schedule-wise. So
I think that's normal though.
Yeah. So I think we probably are going to need to put some thought into it.
Yeah.
So do you hear an opportunity? You want to give your child every opportunity possible.
Yeah. So I think that's an important place to talk about. Every time we say yes to something, we are saying no to something else because we do have limits. And part of the reality, the delusion we live in is that there are no limits or there's no real cost. I was on a principal's advisory board for a long time. And the school was, passionate about success, and they should be, and they were successful academically and athletically. But I was the one parent and I was there because I was a parent, not because I'm some brilliant man or pastor. I said, what's the cost of this excellence? Because there's going to be a cost. And they know the cost, but that didn't seem to matter as much as the, accolades of success. We're ranked here. But yet the underbelly of that is stress, anxiety, depression, suicide, attempts, thoughts, all that rising. I mean, how many kids are in counseling for all sorts of things now as a result? So there is a cost. And part of that, I think, has to do with a society that's conformed to a pattern of the world that says, say yes, 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 yes. And if you say no, that seems odd or strange, and you might even put your child at a disadvantage. But I think it's the opposite. I think if you say yes to everything, you're actually putting your child at a disadvantage. And I think, unfortunately, we don't wake up to that until sometimes a crash hits. And the crash might not be catastrophic, but it might be, the capacity to have joy, the capacity to enjoy other things that you're doing are so diluted by the schedule that's so intense. So every time we say yes, we're saying no to something else. That's true individually, but also as a family. So how do we make decisions to know what to say yes to, what not to say yes to?
We've never talked about that.
Yeah, I think that would be a really good thing to have a framework for. As of right now, it's just an opportunity will pop up, and then it's like a pack in a suitcase. It's like, okay, we can fit this in here. Let's get to I'm gonna call Lauren in. All right, here's the calendar. Here's the opportunity. Where we're gonna fit that in. And, so probably stopping that would be a good place to start, and then actually, I don't know, having a hierarchy for how we decide what is, how do we group these opportunities into maybe tiers of we're overloaded right now on the insignificant type fun stuff, and we're short on the deeper stuff. I don't know. I mean, just even putting thought into that, because sometimes we'll have weeks of just not like heavy things, but it's just like serious things that we cannot drop the ball on for a whole week straight.
Right.
And then something else comes up, and it's like, wow, we really loaded ourselves up with things we can't back out of or get out.
And then there's no capacity for what could be or necessity even with something that's taken place. I didn't expect you guys to have an answer, but I think it's a great question. And I think that it's a great question to wrestle with because in some ways, when you don't have a rhythm of rest, that's normal. And I'm going to go back to scripture at this point, talk about the way God designed us, the way God designed the week, the way he gave the Sabbath, all those things. We've kind of flushed the idea. Maybe most people most believers would acknowledge, yeah, that's an important part of our life still, but in terms of reality, it's barely anything like what it used to be. And I'm not a strict Sabbatarian in the sense that the only thing you can do is go to church, read your Bible, sing hymns, and then repeat, all day long. But the idea of what the Sabbath was ultimately about was honoring God, submitting to his plan. He himself rested. What's the order therefore? What's it about? And one aspect of that we often don't think about is surrender. It's the idea that I'm going to surrender to one who knows better than me, who knows everything, who's all powerful, who says this is good for me. I'm going to surrender this time and space to him in a way that will bring him glory, trusting that it will also be for my good. Because one of the things I think happens is we don't have the time and space to even ask those questions. We don't have the time and space to reflect on them. So we really do rush towards some, whether it's a good one or not, we don't even always know, paradigm that says, here's how we're going to make that decision. And we even make that decision fast as opposed to listening. And I think maybe that's the biggest part of what rest brings us, is this opportunity to really listen to the Lord. And so how do you hear the Lord? Well, his Holy Spirit speaks through his word, but also through, wisdom of other believers, wisdom about how do you guys think we should move forward with this? And I think that's where the body of Christ can be so powerful is, do you think we should sign our child up for another ... What do you think? Do you think, now depending who you've surrounded yourself with, you may have only friends who are also yes. That's why sometimes older people being invested in a small group or something can get perspective because they've done it already and realized, hey, that can be dangerous. But this idea of listening, I think, is really important when it comes to rhythms. I need space in my life to hear the Lord, to hear his voice. We together need space to do that as well. A community needs space to do that as well. And I think that's really lost. Would y'all agree?
Yeah, I think so. I think you hit a good point about copying off the homework of others in this regard. It's so helpful to look at people just with a child 6 months older than ours, or 1 year older than ours, or 10 years older than ours. And you can learn as much. And they're also, at least people we are around, so generous with their knowledge and wisdom.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just as simple as being humble enough to say, we're struggling with this. And then people are, just really free to open up and say, oh, we did too. And here's what we would not do again. And that's really helpful to have them make those mistakes for us.
I love how you said that too. You said 6 months ahead and then older, because sometimes I think when we're young parents, we feel like we have nothing to offer younger parents until, our kids are a lot older. That's not true. You're going to learn things right now that you're like, oh yeah, for our second child or third child or whatever, a friend's child, this is what we learned. And this would be important to realize. And I think one of those things is we need more people who are willing to say, hey, the pace we're on is not sustainable. So as a community, we need to learn to make decisions. Where should we go for that advice? We'll go to the Word of God. What is the rhythm that God has established for us? Why does that really matter? And, I think of Romans 12:2, don't conform to the pattern of the world. Well, the pattern of the world is go, 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 go. But be transformed, so changed by the renewing of your mind. And I love that. The renewing means not a one-time renewal, but an ongoing renewing. So every time you and I have the opportunity to think about something to say yes to, there's actually a chance for renewal of mind, which if the answer is we need to say yes to that, that becomes really significant when we are hitting a wall because it's hard. Doesn't mean it's wrong just because it's hard, just means it's hard. But we know God called us to this, so let's persevere. Other times it's going to be hard because you'll say no, and then your child will feel left out. They may thank you for it later, or maybe not, but they will feel left out, or you feel left out, or we're doing something wrong, because sometimes people will tell you you've done it. I remember our oldest son he's still a good athlete, but he was a really exceptional athlete. He was like his mom. So Caden was told, like all of our kids, you can do one thing at a time, one sport at a time, and one extracurricular. Like you want to do music or theater or something, you can do that as well. But we're not going to do 2 sports at a time or 3. If there's an overlap of seasons, we will let you do that. But he was playing, I guess, Y football, and then another person said he could also play lacrosse at the same time. First of all, he wasn't interested in lacrosse, but his friends were telling him to be interested in lacrosse. So we told him you have to decide, you can't do both. And he's like, then I'll choose football, but I really want to do both. I'm like, you can't do both. We're going to let you do both. But my friends are all doing both. Sorry, we can only do one thing at a time. Well, the way that was translated by the other families was the Davises can't afford, because he's a pastor, for him to do both. So let's sign him up for lacrosse. Let's buy him all the gear. So they did. How sweet. They showed up at our house with all the gear. And before me and my son said, we'd love to offer this to you. And then I had to stay in front of my son. It's not money. That's the problem. It's time. We're not going to let him play lacrosse. Caden, go to your room. I'm ticked off, that you did that in front of my son. I didn't do that, actually, but I was like, this is not going to be fun. And Caden was really mad. He was really upset that took place. And probably doesn't even remember it now, but he might. But it was that kind of culture of really wanting to do something good that was fighting against something that we had already established as this is going to be really important to our family moving forward. And by the way, to those listening, I'm not saying that's the right thing or the wrong thing. It was right for us as a family in the way we knew it was right, because we did take time as a couple to pray about that. So what is our paradigm going to be? Let's say one thing at a time, because we have 3 kids. We didn't know we'd have 5 eventually, but we had 3 at the time. We're like, it's already too busy. And if we value time together for dinner, we're only going to be able to do one thing per kid at a time. And it was still busy. So those things are hard, and the enemy comes at you with them, and all of a sudden you feel that temptation of, we got to make all these sacrifices in order to do that. I think we've got to create a rhythm of teaching people how to say no and what to say yes to. So if you say no to something, you're saying yes to something else. If you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else.
I think our culture at large looks at rest as a negative thing.
Why do you think so? I agree with you. Why do you think they think it's negative?
Because that's something that you could be using to do something else. Something that's bettering yourself, bettering the community, bettering the world.
Mm-hmm.
We're Americans, the French take August off, but like, not us.
For our French listeners, sorry for that. But.
No, but, I think there's just, there's almost it is the culture. I don't know. Like, I mean, like your sweet friends that just could not fathom another reason that you wouldn't be doing that. And then, I probably would have been the person outside your door in that situation.
Yeah, and I probably have been in other situations, maybe not with sports, but maybe it was with a mission trip or something else. Why aren't you letting your kid come to this thing on Sunday night? Because it's our family time. I remember hearing that when I was a youth pastor, thinking those people were making a mistake. I don't think they were making a mistake. I think they were valuing something really important that as a single and then married without children man couldn't see. So it's easy to miss. It's easy to miss it.
Yeah, I think it's just, and it might not be the whole culture. I mean, just like the ponds that we swim in or whatever. I think something about, like you said, there's nothing wrong with being driven or desires for excellence, that's cool, but just being aware of the trade-offs in that. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that there are communities that this entire conversation might sound kind of a little bit foreign to them, It's like, how do we get more involved in things, but just for where we are, especially at this church too, I just, admire so many people I run into everywhere here. It's just, it's almost intimidating sometimes to think about, like, I'd really like to get to know that couple better or, those people better, but I can't even imagine imposing onto their schedule. Yeah. And so I think that's when the culture is, when you assume that everyone's got too much going on, that you can't even get to know somebody better. Maybe that's a time to check.
That's a really good word, because I think, Lauren, to your point, rest, first of all, real rest isn't lazy, right? We tend to think it is. Like if we got in an elevator, we're going up the elevator and somebody steps on and we hadn't seen them, we're like, hey, how's life? You staying busy? No, not really. I got a lot of free time. Is there virtue in that, right? That would be so shocking for someone to hear. It's like, oh, well, you're just a sloth. It's not true. When we talk about rest and rhythms of rest, we're really not talking about necessarily like just a day of sleep or a day of, just a spa. This is really resting in the Lord and the rhythms that he's established for us. So it's not passive. And I think that's the first thing we misunderstand about rest, is that biblical rest is not passive. It is a submission, and that is always hard, because while surrender should be kind of relaxing and folding or falling into the arms of God, we fight that, and everything inside us fights it. So it actually is not lazy. It's actually hard. Doing silent retreats, for example, I always tell people that if you have the understanding that a silent retreat is you have 3 or 4 days of silence before the Lord where you're just, it is hard. It is so hard. And anybody that's ever been on one realizes that there's a point where you kind of begin to understand how to surrender to the Lord in that moment. But it's really, really hard. And I think part of the reason why it's hard is because all of us, most of us in our community at least, have been raised with this idea of staying active is what's most virtuous. And so what I try to do is help people see, particularly the story of Martha and Mary, is that Martha was busy and anxious about many things. That's what the text says, where Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus. So everybody sees that posture of sitting as passive. It's not. It's an active work of surrender, which is actually harder than what Martha is doing. We are wired to be Martha. It's harder to be Mary. But Mary, Jesus said it, chose the better portion, and it would not be taken from her. And I think that's what has to change, is it's this mindset of surrendering to the feet of Christ that establishes the rhythm of our life that we really believe is the better portion, as opposed to the staying busy and active and anxious about all these things. I think it's an amazing story that Christ gave us in that, in that gospel story. Really powerful.
It's always convicting when you come across a story and you think, wow, Jesus, not very Dallas of you.
That might be the title for this show. Yeah. Jesus, that's not very Dallas of you. I love that. In the show notes, please make note that I said that. That's fantastic. I think, I'm not going to say who it was, but I was not good at this, and I still would say I have a lot of growth to go. But my marriage wouldn't have made it if there weren't men in my life who saw the drivenness and the success of that drivenness, who said, you're not going to make it. And then they had a conversation with my wife, who described the way she was living, and they're like, and you're not going to make it really soon. In other words, you are out of control. And I was out of control by craving the affirmation that others were giving me based on the busyness of my life, which was bearing fruit. And they were wise enough to say, that fruit's going to go away. You're going to shrivel up. You're going to lose your marriage. And one example was my travel. Now, some people have to travel for work. I understand that. So this is not a rebuke of that at all. I didn't have to travel as much as I was traveling. And my wife did the math for me one day and said, if you continue at this pace, by the time Caden is 5, you will have missed almost 2 years of his life. Yeah. And I was like, okay, that was a big wake-up call. But just because it's a wake-up call doesn't mean I'm going to change. There has to be something greater, a voice that's greater than that. And that's the surrender of, Lord, what do you want our life to look like? And that meant for both of us, because the amount of speaking I was doing generated, never specified amounts. I didn't have a contract that said, you pay me this much to speak. But there would be honorariums and things like that. So all of a sudden that meant this is going to be also a change in our lifestyle, which that wasn't an easy thing to decide. So there, when you surrender and trust a new rhythm, you have to trust the Lord for the provision that's going to come if it's necessary. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so without those people speaking into my life, though, I don't think I would have made the right decisions. I wouldn't have even known that we really needed to look at this. So that dynamic, I think, of other people being able to share from their experiences is really important. I was moving to PCPC 20 years ago, the summers when we had our very first interviews. And one of the real challenges for us with the search committee was, what's the expectations of the rhythm of our life can look like? Because those men who'd spoken in my life were in St. Louis, and it was transformational. So how was I going to bring that kind of new rhythm that I'd been establishing there to a new city, Dallas? And I had no idea how driven Dallas was at this point. So anyway, time goes on. Our elders were amazing, and they still are, at honoring the rhythms of my life, because they think that's what this church needs most from me, and I couldn't agree more. So we started establishing things like the silent retreats, et cetera. And then a dear, dear friend, I won't say her name, you probably know her, one day in frustration said to me, Mark, it takes a lot of Marthas in order for you to be a Mary. And I was like, that hurt. That stings. And then I stopped and said, no, that's really from the pit of hell. And I got to lovingly confront that in her, because now she's making me feel shame for doing the thing that this church needs most for me to do. And we had a great conversation about it. And she was humble to say, I shouldn't have said that, but I'm exhausted. Okay, why are you exhausted? because I'm making you be exhausted? You're exhausted because you're hearing another voice that's driving these rhythms of your life that you're finding identity in. So instead of just getting mad at her or her mad at me, we had to really, she wasn't on staff even, she was just a friend. It's like, we got to speak into this because the enemy wanted me to feel bad every time I was spending time in prayer and isolation like I do most Mondays. And I heard that and was like, okay, we got to correct this at so many levels.
I think Lauren is so great about being supportive all the time, but so part of my challenge has been, or growth has been, trying to discern when she doesn't want to be the bad guy or doesn't want to be the no fun, police. And so, and then having to work through her then if I do cancel something or don't do something because she just needs a break, being sensitive enough to say, no, you're not that fault. I needed to not do that. And, and not letting her beat herself up about putting her foot down when she should have in the first place. And that's something that it's tough to navigate.
Yeah, because you could feel guilty about that. Like, I mean, my wife Christina would say that. I invented a term called, this is terrible, I hate that I said this to her, but I said, liposuction. And I said, I need to copyright that. Liposuction. You're sucking the life right out of me. Not because of you, because of what you're not letting me do. Well, that's one of those statements that, I thought was funny, but also poked. It hurt. And she's like, I have been given perspective on your life that you need, that will help you be the abiding man you need to be. And I'm like, I know, but that's still sucking life out of me. So we could laugh about it, but there was still pain there. And I think she could feel shame if she was ever the one, wait, Mark, wait, tap the brakes. I hate tapping the brakes. I mean, I'm not wired to tap the brakes. And she is able to move a little bit slower in a good way that helps us do that. And I resented that at first, but not anymore. Now I realize, oh, what a gift she is. I just say, do you have to make a decision about this fast? And usually the answer is no, but I want to make a fast decision, especially if it excites me, and then move on. So do you ever feel that way in terms of the shame?
I feel a lot of shame. Anytime I have to tell Sam no, I feel bad. I'm a people pleaser, though, and I want him to be happy. He works so hard and provides for our family, and I want him to be able to go out, but sometimes it's just not a good time, and I feel bad, but...
So my job is not only to determine that that's how she's feeling, but then also to prevent her from feeling bad about it, feeling that way. But it's part of marriage that helps sharpen you, I think.
I agree totally, and I think that's part of why the rhythms, even as we started this conversation, you've moved as people do from, I'm in charge of my own rhythms. Now, the two of us have our individual and corporate rhythms, and now we have a little girl, and all of that begins to change. And it can be really hard for some people in terms of those adjustments, but the blessing of marriage is that it helps sanctify us. It helps that happen. Like even as you express, I feel bad about that, but I'm not willing to compromise for the sake of the health, my own health, the health of our marriage, the health of my husband. I think that's really good. And it's not, I don't want anybody that's listening or watching to perceive that this is an easy conversation, because when we want to do these things, especially if they're good things, and that's our problem isn't really too many choices for bad things. The greatest enemy of the great is the good. And so it's having that kind of control and process for understanding, what do we say yes to?
I almost feel like having a kid helped me dial into Lauren's.
How so?
Because Lauren's subtle about her thoughts on what she wants to have happen. Eloise is not. And so I think that I was forced into having to discern what someone else's needs were. By the fact that it's like, she's going to keep screaming until we figure this out. And Lauren will never do that. But maybe she is internally screaming until I figure it out. And I need to just build those muscles and work through the reps of taking myself out of myself for a few minutes and trying to figure out what is going on here. I think it's like the quote, I don't know, Yuval Levin had this book called A Time to Build, where he talks about institutions or whatever. And the question litmus test he poses is you ask yourself, how ought I act given my role here? And I think okay, I am now a father. That's an identity I have. So like, how should I act as a father? And then it's like, I'm a husband. How should I act as a husband? And just getting into the habit of like, when you're a single guy, you don't have to, it's like, how should I act as a single bachelor? Like that's an easy answer.
Yeah.
But then like you only run through one identity maybe, or institution, and then now picking up more and more, it at least gives you that muscle memory of asking yourself that question before you make any decisions.
Yeah, I love that. And what I would add to that is a thought that, when we ask the question, how ought I act? Who's giving the answer? Like, where am I getting that answer? Am I getting that answer from my own experience, myself, my parents before me, my friends, people in my small group? Am I getting it from them and from the Lord? Am I getting it from my spouse? Because I think that's important. It's like, where are we looking for the foundation of where that answer is going to come? And something that I had not thought of in terms of phrasing it this way until just a few years ago was clearly the source of wisdom, God's wisdom, his omniscience, that he's all-knowing, is incredible for us to think about. But so often when we think about our relationship with God, when it comes to making decisions about schedules, about rhythms, often it's, this is what I'm going to do, and now I'll inform God. Or I'll have a brief prayer of, God, this is what I'm going to do, bless this, as opposed to, I'm going to surrender to you this question for a season. Sometimes you got to make a fast decision, but oftentimes we don't. Would you, speak into that? Which sounded to me like that's the climax. That's the great thing. Listen to the Lord. But even there was something I was doing that was just barely off. And that was, I was doing this, but not with God. It's almost like I was doing it for God. And what I mean by that is there was almost like this transaction that would take place where if I'm not careful, I'm kind of like hustling God, as opposed to, and that was a great chapter. There's a book called that, Hustling God. I don't remember the author's name. Craig Barnes, I think. I think went on to be the president of Princeton Seminary, but I read that book a long time ago, and I was like, I love the title. That's what I'm doing. Anyway, the difference between doing it, for God versus with God is really substantial, because what happens is we realize in every decision we're making, we have the opportunity to be in this relationship with him because of our union, where the one who is all wise, all knowing, who can learn nothing about the situation, nothing about our makeup, our rhythms, et cetera, is glad to give me counsel and direction. And that doesn't mean he says, yes, you should say yes to this wedding or not. But when we do surrender all of that to him, there begins to be just a maturing, I think, just this nurture of this relationship that really does give us pretty significant wisdom pretty quick about what to say yes to, what to say no to. Or if we're at different places as a husband and wife, the ability to surrender even to that and to say, okay, let's come together. And if we're not, then, okay, what's the next step for us to get together? Well, often that's either just more time, more prayer, or bringing in close friends to give counsel. Does that make sense? That
it's just like asking yourself, like, what's God doing here and how do I join him? As opposed to like, what am I doing here and how can I get God to jump on my agenda?
That's exactly right. You said that better than I did, quicker than I did, more eloquent than I did. But that's it. That the essence is, I have a union with God, which means I'm his. He's in me, I'm in him. The abiding relationship with Christ. I want to do all things with you and not just check the boxes because I'm doing them for you. And I think that's a powerful but subtle difference in terms of the way we view our life, which I think God honors and is greatly pleased by when we live that way. Yeah, I loved how you said that. Is there any questions that you, as a young couple, have thought about? Like, I'd love to know how people think about this, and not that I would have the answer necessarily, and you might not have any questions, but as you just think about, your life moving forward, and this little 14-month-old who's now walking, soon to be running around your house, and all the things that are about to come your way as opportunities for her, it's exciting.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's funny when you think about going from like 0 to 1 kid or whatever, and then like you have the 1 kid and you're like, we're doing this, it's like, should we do this more? And like multiply, and those are just fun conversations to have. Is just like, is there a limiting principle here? What did those stages look like, and how does the life, in your experience, what's the most drastic adjustment going from like 0 kids to 1, 1 kids to 2, 2 to 3? I mean, where does
it's funny. It's a great question, and I think it depends on the kid. I really do. Like, Kara, our oldest, was a really easy baby, right? I mean, she would not go to sleep easy, but was content in her crib, and then would sleep through the night pretty early. Madeline, it's so funny because people who know Maddie today can't believe what I'm about to say was true of her, but she was our temper tantrum baby. I mean, she was the baby that would throw herself on the floor, kick and scream. She would fall asleep easy, but then by 2 a.m, almost every night for like the first 9 months, would wake up and then would be up for 2 or 3 hours. If I sleep 2 hours and I get woke up, I'm up for the rest of the night. I just cannot go back to sleep. So sleep deprivation as a result of that second child really became a factor in our life. Interestingly, I went ahead at that point and decided to get off of all caffeine. I'm just not going to let caffeine adjust and I didn't drink coffee even. It was just a lot of Cokes, and which was terrible, but I just loved it. So anyway, no caffeine except for that. Then I got off all caffeine for like 10 years. Then Caden was born 2 years later after Maddie. He was pretty easy. 8 years after Caden was born, Esther Kate was born. And I went back on coffee hard because she was not a child that slept well either. So all of a sudden, I'm up in the middle of the night. And then we had Sammy, our baby, who is the easiest of all of our children by far, but the same rhythm of he would fall asleep and then wake up at 2 or 3 and couldn't go back to sleep. And we're like, we have 5 kids. Why can't we figure this out? We've read every book and we've gotten worse with each kid, it seems, in terms of the rhythms. And so I think it does kind of depend on the kid. But once you move from just one to the dynamic of 2 or 3 or more, then you really do begin to realize, okay, the limits of our calendar are what really changes, because it's not just one Mother's Day out now. It's Mother's Day out plus this child needs to be here, this child needs to be here. And having space with the Lord to collectively look at all of that and make those adjustments is really important. And often what is the greatest casualty of that is the marriage, because what's left out is time for the husband and wife just to be together, to remember we love each other, to remember we need to have romance. We need to enjoy this. So Christina and I, early on, when we just had the 3 kids, somebody taught us this, like, you need a date night once a week, and you need to make that easy. So you need to have a sitter set up ahead of time. And then it just needs to be non-negotiable. Mark, you're creative, so you need to bring creativity to the dates. Don't just show up and go see a movie and dinner every time. Or that's what you'll do if you don't have it. And if you love doing that, do that. But you really need to have that. And we did. We were really faithful to that. When we moved to Dallas, we just had the 3 kids. A group of mothers quickly became our babysitting core and did that for us, which was great. Life was still pretty easy. They were 2, 4, and 6, but wasn't long before sports, drama, music, art, all that was coming. It's like, okay, when are we going to do this? And then all of a sudden, there weren't even nights or time to do the dates anymore. And that's when we were like, okay, we've got to figure out this. And we did. So we started having date nights. Then date nights became a conversation about 2 things I hate to talk about. Calendar is one, and the other would be anything that's like just related to money or a chore or something like that. I don't want to talk about those ever, especially not on date night. Well, that's like my wife's love language.
Her favorite thing to talk about.
She thinks that's romantic. Oh, look, here's the calendar. And I'm like, and it really, I mean, if she was here, she'd be like, hey, that's a whole other Deep Light series, not even one episode. You're a mess. And so we had to really get some help on that. It's like, okay, if we don't have time or space somewhere else to talk about those things, when are we going to talk about them? I don't want to talk about them on a date. So we've got to figure out other pockets of time to do that, which we do. And then we had to deal with the fact that my wife wanted me to want to talk about those things. And I said, I'm never going to want to talk about those things. And I don't have to want to talk about them if I'm faithful talking about them. So we went through a lot there. It's a long answer to your question. But deep down, so often the casualty is the marriage, because no time is put in the schedule for the 2 of you. No time's put in the schedule for mom and dad. Do you remember why we got married? Remember why we loved each other? And even if time's put in there, it can be consumed by, just the daily operational life. So I really think couples need 2 different points. They need a point of romance where they continue to do things fun for the relationship, and then they need a point of, just management, planning. And some couples are better at that than others, and usually one person in the couple is more driven towards that than the other, and that's okay. That's not bad. But I think that's a big deal, is making sure you reserve space for you all. There's a long answer to your question.
I think it's good warning too. I mean,
I think we do a good job of it now, finding time just the two of us. But I feel like as more kids come along, one has been easy for us. I think beyond one, things are going to start getting challenging.
it has been mostly easy. I mean, I don't know if I'm just falling into my remembering things more fondly than, but I mean, it has been like fun to go into the stage of life. And I think it is always scary to think about it because it's something that's new. But once you get there, it's pretty great.
Well, something that Christine and I taught a thing here several years ago, which we want to bring back, was simply called Parenting in the Present. And the theme through the whole class was, in Christ Jesus, you're the perfect mom and you're the perfect dad for Eloise, period. That's because you're in Christ. In Christ Jesus, he's going to give you everything you need to make every decision you need to make for her. And if God blesses you with other children, there's children too. That's a big deal to remember that. But apart from Christ, that's when we're not doing it with him. That's when we're just informing him. That's when we're saying yes, 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 and not asking God, should we be saying yes? Or saying no, and not asking God if we should say no. And that's where I think the joy of the relationship with Christ can become so beautiful. It's like, he's not just something we do. He is the essence of our relationship, both as husband and wife, but also as mom and dad and daughter, which is really fun because the demands on your time are real. The challenges that your children face as they get older become more complex. They're not very complex right now, but they are still physically demanding what she demands of you, and screaming if she doesn't get her way. That's real. But later on, the consequences become greater as they think about challenges. Our oldest child called us last night. With my wife was on the laptop doing her thing. I'm on my iPad. He calls, and it's time for an important conversation with him because he's ready to talk. It was great. And it wasn't super substantive, but it was when he wanted to talk. And it was kind of about his future, what he's thinking. Well, you have to be ready for that because you can't say, hey, this is neat. It's 10:45. How about let's schedule a coffee on a Zoom call tomorrow? You're up in Arkansas, I'm here. And he's like, not going to happen. So another part of rhythms is if you're not, in a sense, creating deposits for that so you have capacity for the other, that's pretty substantial too. And you'll learn to do that. Just like, hey, right now things seem to be going okay. That's where rest moves from kind of the weekly rhythm to the monthly rhythm, then to kind of the seasonal rhythm. Like, that's why we're doing this in the summer. It's like, how could you change something about your summer that might give you rest and restoration as you think about moving into the fall? Well, this has been sweet to have this time with you all, just to hear a little bit about what the Lord's doing in your life and the way you're growing. Very, very encouraging the way you're thinking about things. So I'm very grateful.
Well, we're in a good church body, so it helps.
The body of Christ really does matter. It's a huge thing to have others who are coming alongside us, helping as we often make that vow during baptism, which we have Father's Day, by the way, is this Sunday.
Yes.
How about that?
That's exciting.
Your second Father's Day.
It is.
So that's really cool. This is my 26th, Kara was born. She was born the day after Father's Day, so I missed that first one. I could have 27, but she was born the day after. So anyway. Well, I'm really grateful for you all, and we'll continue to pray God's blessing on you all. And perhaps in the future, we'll do another one. We'll talk about different, challenges with parenting, which we're often going to do on the Deep Light podcast because it's such a reality.
Cool.
So
we'll bring the challenges and look forward to it.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys. We're so grateful if you've been watching and listening to Deep Light. As always, if you want to reach out to us about something, you can do so at deeplight@pcpc.org. It could be on any subject. It could be on parenting, rhythms, or just some other issue that you're experiencing in your life. We would love to walk alongside you. There's going to be show notes that follow each episode. If there's something that we talked about that is highlighted there, you can find information there. We are so grateful for the time that we've had with you. God bless. Thank you guys again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Deep Light podcast from Park Cities Presbyterian Church. We would love for you to be our guest this Sunday morning as we gather together for worship at 8, 9:30, or 11 a.m. We are located in the Uptown Dallas area at the corner of Oaklawn Avenue and Wycliffe Avenue. To find out more, please visit pcpc.org.